What's up everybody, welcome to another video in the Python basic series, and in this video we'll be talking about error handling in Python. In the previous video we saw what errors are. There's two kinds, syntax errors and runtime errors, or also called exceptions, and we saw a bunch of different types of exceptions, right? In this video we'll see how to handle errors or exceptions. You can use these terms interchangeably because exceptions are also kind of error, but the thing is that you cannot handle syntax errors. There is no way to handle syntax errors. Okay, so all you can handle is exceptions. So maybe saying exception handling is more accurate way of saying that. Anyway, this is the structure Python provides us to handle errors or exceptions. Okay, so there's a try block, there's an except block, there's an else block which is optional, and there's a finally block which is optional, meaning that these two are mandatory if you try to handle your exceptions. Okay, so in the try block you do something, you write a code which might throw an exception. Okay, so for starters, let me just write something with no errors. So let's say hello, and if I try to run that, I'm gonna get a hello. Perfect. Okay, so it's working. Let's say in the second line I try to let's say create a variable s, and I try to divide that. I try to assign it to 5 divided by 0. So if I try to run that, it's not going to work, right? It's going to give me a 0 division error. Awesome. So in the except block, what we do is we try to handle an exception. Okay, so you don't write you write either exception, or you specify the exact type of exception. So for the first example, I'm just going to write exception here. So this exception keyword, this is like a generic exception. So this kind of encapsulate all the exceptions. So no matter what kind of exception is occurring in the try block, it's going to catch all of them, and then whatever you write here, it's going to print that whenever it finds an exception. So let's say that you write here an error occurred. Okay, and if you try to run that, it's going to say hello, and an error occurred. So here it's not actually saying that there's a 0 division error or anything. Instead of that big ass ugly message that Python was giving us earlier, we get an error occurred, which is a lot easier, right? So, but this is not very helpful because we don't know what kind of error occurred. Okay, so that's why this is not a very good practice to just use exception. What we should do is, for example, in this block, let's say that we're dealing with numbers. Maybe we are making a calculator. Okay, so what kind of exceptions can we run into? The kind of exceptions that we can run into are maybe 0 division error, or maybe a name error. Maybe you're trying to access a variable which does not exist, or a type error. Maybe you're trying to multiply two strings or something crazy like that. That would be a type error, right? So you could accept a specific type of error or exception here. So let's say that you're trying to accept 0 division error. So you can simply say accept 0 division error, and here then you can say that not divide by 0. If you try to run that, it says hello and cannot divide by 0. So this makes sense because now we know what we are trying to do. We are trying to divide a number by 0, and we cannot divide by 0, right? So if it was 2, it would simply print hello, and it would simply execute. Since we're not printing this out, let's actually print this out. Okay, so now we are getting the value 2.5, and not getting an except we're not getting this print statement. We're not getting cannot divide by 0 error or anything, because the except block, whatever is written in the except block, is not being executed because we don't have any exceptions in the try block. Okay, but the except block is mandatory. It's not optional. So let's say that you comment this out, and if you try to run just the try block, it's going to give you an error. It says syntax error, invalid syntax. It says else, and okay, let's also comment these out. If you try to run that now, okay, I would, okay, it says EOF, which means end of file, while scanning triple quoted string literal. What does it mean? let's comment everything out. Sorry guys. Okay, so here we have a try block, but we don't have anything else. We don't have an except block, and that's why we are getting this error. It says unexpected end of file while parsing, because Python is looking for an except block once it's gone through the try block. So you do need to have at least one except block. You could have multiple, but you should have at least one. Okay. So let's just uncomment this out, and let's also accept let's say name error. Okay, and say maybe name error occurred, and let's try to print maybe a variable which does not exist, where. If we try to run that, it says name error occurred. Okay, and it's not saying cannot divide by 0 because we're not dividing by 0. But if you do try to divide it by 0, it's gonna say cannot divide by 0. Now you can see that we're not getting the name error message anymore, and that's because once you run into this any one exception, the try block's execution stops. Okay, that's what happens. Also, moving on to the else and the finally blocks, what happens here is, let's uncomment this out. Okay, else, which is an optional block, what you can write here is you can write any code which you want to run if there are no errors in the try block. And let's just write no error occurred. If we try to run that, it says cannot divide by 0 because we are still trying to divide by 0. But if we try to let's say divide it by 1 and not do anything stupid in the try block, if you try to run that, it says no errors occurred. So the else block, this gets executed when we don't have any exceptions in the try block. Okay, perfect. But this is optional, so even if we comment this out, it's not gonna give us a syntax error or anything like that, which happened when we were doing that with the except block, right? Also, there's another block, the finally block. It says once we are done executing everything else, do what's written here, right? Whatever is written here is executed no matter what, and that's true. Okay, I wouldn't write whatever shit here. So let's say that you're done with try blocks execution, except blocks execution, everything else is done, but now you want to have a code which runs no matter what. Okay, and let's say that it's like a goodbye message for the user. Let's say that, okay, execution complete, and then you want to do exiting. Okay, if you try to run that, you can see that it says execution complete, exiting, right? Even though it's not exiting because the kernel, the Python kernel, it's still running, but it's just a message for now. Okay, also if we did have an error, it doesn't matter because it would still run. So finally block is still being executed. So we have an error, it says cannot divide by 0, execution complete, exiting. What if you had a name error as well? Well, it doesn't matter because once you have one error, it's not gonna proceed with the rest of execution from the try block, right? But what if you have none of these errors? Let's comment those out, and if I try to run that, it's printing hello and it's printing execution complete, exiting. What if you try to exit the Python kernel here? Let's say that you write quit, which is a function used to quit Python's kernel. Okay, so if you try to run that, what would happen is, let me first tell you and then I'm going to show you. So here it would print hello and then it would try to quit. But the thing is that we have a finally block here, and I told you that no matter what happens, this block would always be executed, right? So if you try to run that, let's also comment out hello, and if we try to run that, so you can see that we are getting a message. It says the kernel appears to have died. It will restart automatically. So we have shut down the Python's kernel, but you can see that we still got this message, execution complete, exiting. And that's because no matter what happens, even if you try to exit Python, no matter what you do, whatever you write here would always be executed. Okay, it's always the case. Okay, so these are the 4 statements that you use, the try, except, else, and finally blocks. You use these 4 blocks to handle errors in your code. So let me give you a practical example. So for example, let's say that you wanna take an input from the user, okay, and you say enter a number. Okay, and you try to, since it's going to be a number, you convert it into an integer and you say s is equal to that. Okay, what if the user enters a string? So for example, if we run that and we say s, it says value error, right? It's a value error. We don't have a clause which deals with value error, so let's just say except value error. Okay, and here say please enter a number. Okay, so if you run that, and now let's say that you want a number, but the user is an idiot and he writes Python, maybe he's blind. If you run that, it says please enter a number, then it says execution complete, exiting. So it's not blocking, or it's not really stopping your code's entire execution. It just gives you a message which is much more understandable for the user, because when you're making a software, your user might not be a software developer like you. He might not be a tech guy. Okay, and if you did not have this value error block here, where you are dealing with the value error, and then if the user wrote a string and if he saw all these stupid things on the screen, it probably wouldn't make sense to him, right? And that's why you want to handle all the exceptions in your code to make it pretty for the user. Also, like sometimes you run into errors in your computer or your phone, and then you get a dialog box or a pop-up which says this error occurred, kindly something, like with a help message or something like that, like how to deal with the error, right? So that's the whole point of dealing with exceptions, and that's really it. You try to do something, and well, you would usually have a super long code, and whenever you anticipate that there's a code segment which might have an error, or exception, you put that entire block of code inside a try block, and then you try to tackle all the exceptions that might occur in that code. Okay, that's usually the case. But here I just told you how to use these statements. In the future video, like in the next one, we'll probably work on the calculator that we were working on earlier, and we would make a bit more advanced version of it, and then we'll try to apply all these things to make our calculator more strong, robust, okay, so that it's hard to break. It's hard for the user to break our software, right? So that's it for this video. If you have any doubts, put them down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.